Welcome back to Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Craig.
And we are here with a very special guest, Keldy Zabriskie. Welcome, Keldy.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So Keldy is, how long have we known each other?
About 2 years.
A couple of years, right? Keldy is a very talented person who's come into Telos. He actually works over at our Carter House, which is our specialty program for substance use disorder. He works with adolescent boys, and he's come in and he's been a force to be reckoned with. He's just brought in tons of personality, tons of leadership, tons of expertise, personal experience, and you've really kind of given that whole program a facelift, and it's much improved because of the work you've done there. So I'm excited to have you here. Really excited to hear your thoughts and ideas about this really important issue, substance use disorder, which seems to be an issue that's just progressing. It's just getting worse and worse, not less in our society. Yeah. And it's the one that
we haven't figured it out.
Yeah, it's the one that in fact, before we started recording, I was talking with Keldy and I was just expressing to him, this issue is the issue that keeps me up at night. This issue is the one that I worry the most about when our young people graduate from the program and go on with their lives. When we do hear if there's somebody who's struggling, it typically centers around substances. Right. It's just a stubborn issue, and it's a dangerous issue, and it's one that merits a lot of our attention. So with that said, Keldy, I would really love to hear about your story, your personal experiences, both personal and professional, that brought you into this profession, because it's not something that just anyone wants to hop into.
Right. Well, let me start off by saying there are lots of little moving pieces to my story, so please interrupt me if you have questions or if I need to clarify anything, and give me some signal. I tug on your ear if I'm rambling. So please feel free to butt in and ask me questions as I go. But the reason I'm so passionate about substance use is actually because I'm a recovered addict myself. I was born in the area. I grew up in Utah, and I came from a very, very conservative home, very religious. And the troubles for me started back when I was a teenager. I was very, very invested in my religious conservative upbringing. And this is just my experience. This won't be everyone's experience, but this is how it played out for me. I was speaking at church every week. I was a leader in my church group, and my church was very, not vocally against LGBTQ issues, but it was something we just didn't talk about then in the 90s. Nobody really discussed, can you be a member of this church and be gay? It was just something that I kind of knew from hearing the whispers of my parents and my neighbors, like, if someone was LGBTQ, we don't talk about that, and we don't really invite them to the cookout. We just kind of keep our distance and try to be as polite as possible without bringing it up. So this became an issue for me in my teenage years because I realized I was a member of that community. And at first I tried for years at the end of high school to pray to my understanding of what my higher power was, to take the gay part of me out, and it did not work despite all of my best efforts. I tried to double down within my religious beliefs, and it just didn't work. That's not how it worked for me. So I had this really troubling dichotomy inside of me. I loved my church group. I loved my community. It was a very healthy community, but it was all based around this religion. And this religion, seemingly to me, did not accept this part of me that I could not change, part of my gay identity. And it was my understanding at the time that I can't reconcile these two parts of me. So one of these is going to have to leave. And I wanted to get rid of this part because this part meant so much to me. Yeah. But I couldn't get rid of this part of me, despite my best efforts. So eventually I got rid of my community. And, I had this fear
that
my
community.
Yes. Yeah. I had this fear that if I told people in my community that, I have these feelings, towards people of the same gender, like I have questions about my gender, that they would have rejected me. So I made a very conscious choice to walk away first. Mm-hmm. So instead of having to face that fear and possibly be rejected, I just left them. And I had no community left because that was my entire life growing up. Mm-hmm. By the time I graduated high school and started going to college, I had left behind my church community, which was everyone, my family, my friends, everyone I went to high school with, but I started college. And when I went to college, nobody knew me. I was a new face on that campus. So they didn't know that I had been struggling with depression, suicidal ideation for years because of this issue in my life. And they looked at me and they looked at me and said, "Oh, that's probably a gay person." And it was great. I never had to come out at all.
Right.
I got to
Right.
college and they just assumed that this is a part of my life that I've been comfortable with for years. And so I ran with it. It was fantastic. Also in college, I was introduced to a lot of new things. In my community, there wasn't substance use growing up. It was a very sheltered and insulated community. It was very caring. There wasn't a lot of danger around it. But when I went to college, I met friends that were different from me growing up, and they used substances. They smoked cigarettes and they drank beer, and a lot of them did it with moderate success. What I would consider like this is what normal people do,
Hmm.
but I had never seen that before. So I got very curious, and all I knew was that though I had left my previous community behind, it didn't really fix anything about how I felt. I still felt incredibly anxious, fear of rejection. I was depressed. I was suicidal. I didn't want to do anything to hurt myself, but there was this big hole in me thinking that I was somehow wrong because of my identity, thinking no one could ever love me or want to be around me because of my identity. And even if they could get past that, I've left them all in the past anyway for fear that
Hmm.
maybe they wouldn't love me.
Yeah.
And so I felt very alone, very isolated. And I saw all these people around me using substances with varying degrees of success. They seemed happy. And so I decided, I've never tried this before. I've tried the ways that I was raised to confront emotion, and they didn't work for these emotions that I'm feeling around my gender and my identity. So maybe I'll try this as a solution. So I actually went into college for culinary school, and it's really funny. You can see all these modern TV programs about culinary school and
Hmm.
the dramas and stuff, and all the chefs are insane and they all like do cocaine, and that is absolutely a true
Seriously?
motif. Yes.
Yes.
Everyone I met in culinary school was absolutely insane. And so I just started asking my friends in culinary school, like, "Hey, I've never drank or done drugs. Can you show me how to do it?" And they were like, "Yeah, absolutely." They were all too happy to.
Yeah.
I didn't even have to pay. It was free.
Yeah.
And immediately, as soon as I started off just smoking cigarettes and smoking weed and things like that, smaller, what people would consider less harmful
The
drugs,
gateway drugs.
right? The
Yeah.
gateway drugs.
Hmm.
And as soon as I started ingesting these substances, at least for the time I was high, I didn't feel that depression. That hole inside of me filled up, and I felt like I could be a whole person without feeling this anxiety, fear, isolation. I realized that people wanted to be my friends when we smoked weed together. They would ask me my thoughts on things, and no one really cared before that. So maybe this is how I make friends in this part of my adult life now that I've left my younger life
Mhm.
behind. Maybe this is who I am. These are people that want to be around me. They're offering me drugs for free. Like
Hmm.
surely they're good friends.
Hmm.
Um, and it didn't. I stayed in culinary school at that kind of level of usage, very social, um, very often, but not exactly problematic until maybe my first 2 semesters of college were over. And then everything kind of came crashing down, and it happened like that, like the flip of a switch. I wasn't getting into any trouble in school. I was keeping up my grades. I had kind of started to create distance between me and my family more so than I had initially planned because I didn't want them finding out I was smoking weed. Surely, if they were embarrassed about me being gay, they'd be embarrassed about me smoking weed.
Right.
But one day I was at school and I had run out of marijuana and I had a bunch of cigarettes, so I traded a cigarette for a 5 spot of marijuana. What a 5 spot is about a little crumb, just a little
Mhm.
piece. And again, this is 2009, so the legal landscape around marijuana at the time looks really different than it
Yes.
does now. And I was on school property and someone reported me for that trade I made. And I got 3 felony drug charges from that
Wow.
when I was just barely I was either 18 or 19. I was really young. And I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I had never had run ins with the cops before, but I knew how to be a smooth talker. I was very charismatic. I was like, surely this won't be a problem. So I went to jail that same day. Wasn't expecting that. And I had made a decision when I got to jail that day that, well, I cannot call my mom or my dad and ask them to bail me out. My bail was only like $200. I could have easily gone out within an hour, but I decided I cannot confront my parents that I've been doing this. Like, it'll break their heart. So I'll just stay here and serve all of my time. And I think I made it about 3 or 4 days without calling anyone before I started crying and realizing I wasn't getting out anytime soon if I didn't ask for help. So I called my mom. And when you make collect calls from the jail, you get that automated message that goes, "You have a collect call from Keldy Zabriskie." And I remember that message played, and my mom just started weeping on the phone. And she said, "What is going on? Like, where are you in the jail?" I said, "Yeah, I need you to come get me out." So she came and got me out. And we had this kind of reckoning where I spilled all of the things to her. I still didn't talk about my sexuality, but I told her I've been drinking, like I've been depressed, I've been using drugs, and it's because I really dislike myself. I feel incredibly uncomfortable in my skin, and this is the only thing that can help me. And even then, it only helps me when I'm high or when I'm drunk. But then I get sober again, it's still a problem, so I have to do it again. And she was a lot more receptive to me asking for help than I had initially planned. Obviously she was disturbed that I had been keeping these things from her, but she wanted to help me. I was still her child.
But you didn't tell her about your sexuality
I
at
did
all.
not know.
Okay.
And this might be something. It's not the most important part of this story, but this will kind of come into play a little bit towards the end. I was actually born a woman. I'm a transgender man. So at this point, I was identifying as a lesbian. I still looks like a girl, though a very handsome girl. I kind of looked like Justin Bieber.
Okay. All right.
And so there were different levels of the story. That's why I say there's a lot of moving pieces. But I never talked about my sexuality to my mom anywhere near this age of my life, this period of my life. But she decided to help me in court, represent myself with these 3 felony charges. And one of the things the court had asked me for was to complete an inpatient program for substance use disorder. And up to this point, I had only really smoked weed, drank alcohol, smoked cigarettes, and that was about it. I had started dabbling in some other things like prescription pills and things like that, but my big ones were marijuana, alcohol, nicotine. So my mom paid for me to go to a 90-day inpatient program, and I went there, and it is a program that did not last very long. It was for adults. I was by far the youngest one. Everyone else was in their mid 40s, and then there was 18-year-old Keldy there. But I did everything they asked of me. I showed up to my groups. I went to my individual sessions, my family sessions, and I was introduced to 12-step programming, AA, Alcoholics
Right.
Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. And I went to all of the meetings. I did everything that was asked of me. I've always been a good pupil, so I was a good pupil.
Right. Right.
And it went fine. I graduated after the 90 days, and then I was put back out into the real world, and I had dropped out of school at this point because I had lost my scholarship with the charges. And so I started working, and maybe a week after I went to this treatment program, I had a head full of, well, this is what you need to do to not rely on substances. And I said, okay, so what I need to do is talk to my mom, ask for help, emotionally regulate. I need to tolerate distress, go to meetings.
Yeah.
And it did not matter because I still had that big,
Yeah.
painful hole inside of me. I still hadn't asked for help with my gender, my sexuality. And these were things that were weighing on me more as time progressed. Even though people around me, my social group, people my age, could look at me and say, oh, that's a lesbian. She's probably always been a lesbian. There was something else still brewing there. And that's the gender part that I didn't even realize was a problem at the time.
Right.
Again, this is early 2000s. It's not like that was a thing that many people discussed in Utah.
Yeah.
So I figured the best thing I could do, if I didn't want to kill myself, would be to turn back to drugs. And at that point, it began to escalate to prescription medications. I got I was on adult probation and parole after those first couple of charges, and I frequently violated my adult probation and parole because I wasn't trying to hide my substance use from my probation agent. And so maybe a month or two after I had graduated this first program, I violated probation. I went back to county jail for a 60-day stint because I had violated for using. And it was in jail that I actually And remember, I was a lady at this point, so I was in the woman's side of the
Right.
jail. And I met a young woman who was my cellmate in the woman's side of the jail. And we got along really well. And I had never had a very serious girlfriend. I said, sure, this is a real meet cute. Like, this is a great way to meet someone I could date. And she was, I know, it only gets messier from there. So she was nice to me, and she was very receptive. I told her about how I felt and my big teenage emotions and what I didn't know what to do with them, and she just listened to me. And it was one of the first times I felt like I could share how I was feeling, and someone would just listen to me instead of offer suggestions. She did have suggestions, though. She was a heroin addict. So we decided when we were still cellmates in the jail that when I got out, we would try and date, and I would wait for her to get out of jail. And I got out after 2 months, and she got out a month later, and we met up, and immediately we're inseparable. She showed me how to shoot heroin for the first time in my life, and I chose to do it. I had seen what prescription pills could do for me. I had seen what marijuana could do for me, and I knew heroin was one of the bad drugs, one of the scary drugs that causes overdoses. And at that point in my life, I figured, well, I'm probably going to die either way. I'm either going to kill myself because of how depressed I am, or I'll overdose. But at least overdosing buys me some time. I was that seriously suicidal and depressed because I felt so strange in my body. We know what that means now. Most parents will know what that means now.
Sure.
But at the time, there were signs of this, but I didn't know the phrase for it. I would wear layers and layers of clothing in the heat of the summer to try and hide my chest. I had large breasts. It was debilitating for me because people would look at my face, and I had a very masculine face. I held myself masculinely, and they would say, "Oh, hello, sir," when I walked into a store, but my voice was really high, and I'd say, "Oh, hi," and they would like apologize and be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You just look so." I didn't realize that you're a woman. And I'd be like, oh, this is great. And so I stopped talking in public because it felt so bad to me. And I still didn't know what that was. I just felt terrible all the time. The only person I felt comfortable around was this girl I met in jail. But yeah, she taught me how to shoot heroin. And it was something I'm actually kind of grateful for because I think heroin served its purpose in my life at that time. Um, I think heroin saved my life before it completely ruined my life.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I was in a very dark place, and the heroin made it worse, but it served a purpose. It was my solution for a time.
Using the 12-step, it helped you to hit rock bottom.
Yeah, it definitely helped me hit rock bottom, but it also kept me alive.
Yeah.
It was something that I felt passionate about when I felt passionate about nothing else. So it makes no sense saying heroin saved my life, but it did for at least a couple of weeks until everything got worse. From there, I started entering a cycle of addiction. Heroin you don't use casually. You are an addict if you're using heroin
Right,
intravenously. So me and this girl lived together in a little trailer in Springville, and I worked the whole time I was in my addiction, but it would be interrupted because every time I got caught using heroin, I would get sent to jail, and then the only way I could get out of jail was to go out into an inpatient rehab program. And the courts were getting really tired of me after this happened year after year after year. I would go work, use heroin, get caught, go to jail, be released to a program, finish the program, do really well in the program, and still, when I left, there was that part of me that was in so much pain. I went back to heroin. I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't until about 2011 or early 2012, I was, one of the times where I was working and using heroin outside of jail or rehab, that I was reading some online articles about the LGBTQ community. And I came across an article written by a transgender woman describing what transgender meant. And I had never heard that term before. And I kind of thought I knew what a transgender woman was. I mistakenly thought that meant like cross-dressers or drag queens or something.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
it was nobody really knew. It
Right.
wasn't a very common phrase at the time.
Right.
And so I read this article, and this transgender woman mentioned in this article the existence of transgender transgender men. I didn't know that was an option at all. I knew they had some science that could, transition a man into a woman, but not the other way around. And I remember reading that and turning to my girlfriend at the time and saying, I think this might be what the problem is.
Hmm.
This might be what's wrong with me, why I hate myself so much. And she very simply said, if you ever try to do that, I will leave you and you'll never talk to me again. I said, okay, well, never mind. I won't pursue
Wow.
that.
Wow.
Because at this point, I had gone months without talking to my family. I had no friends. This girl was all I had. And it was not a healthy relationship by any means. But she's all I had, and so I wasn't going to do anything to risk losing that. Maybe 6 months later, in November of 2012, I was working, and my girlfriend was up in the city visiting some friends in West Valley, and I got a call from one of her friends saying, hey, your girlfriend has overdosed and she's in the hospital. And this wasn't anything too scary to me. I had overdosed 5 or 6 times by then. My girlfriend overdosed every other month. Usually we'd get the cops called, we'd get Narcan, we'd be brought back, and we'd either go to jail or rehab from there. And I said, okay, well, give me a call when she wakes up. And the friend kind of hesitated and she said, no, this is different. We didn't call the hospital. We didn't call the ambulance. We waited to see if she would be revived. And by the time the ambulance got there, she was unresponsive. And we said, okay, so, what does that mean? And I was told that my girlfriend was in a coma in the hospital, and it was very unlikely she would ever recover. So at this point in my life, I was actually on house arrest at the time, and I got permission from my deputy to go up to West Valley to see my girlfriend at the hospital. And her whole family, it was just a very tragic family. The only surviving family she had was her dad, who was very tired and, drank heavily. And he was very overwhelmed with his daughter being in a coma. And so he didn't know what to do. So him and I spoke for about the 24 hours she stayed in the hospital in a coma. And the doctor said if she ever comes back, she'll be completely brain dead. And the decision was made to pull the plug and let her go. So I lost my best friend of years, my only friend of years, to a heroin overdose. And, I've already said at that point, all the wheels came off and it went crazy, but that's actually when my life became very, very unmanageable. Um, I was invited for the first time in years to stay with my parents for about a week because they were so afraid. They didn't particularly love the relationship I had with this girl. They could see that it was very problematic. And we didn't really talk very much because I would always put up fights about, well, you're trying to separate me from my girlfriend. But they invited me once she passed away to stay with them in their house for about a week. And I typically wasn't invited into the house because all the things that happened with substance use and addiction I had done.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
stolen their things and
Right.
pawned their things. They invited me. They hid all the things in the house they considered as dangerous because they could see that I was not in a very good place. Um, After about a week, I left on my own and decided, well, this heroin thing really isn't working for me anymore. It took my best friend from me. And I kind of want to stay sober because I know it's just a matter of time until I die as well. I don't think it's helping me anymore. This has gotten pretty bad. I'm always in jail. I'm always in rehab. Or I'm always on house arrest, even when I'm not in jail or rehab. And my friends have started dying. So it's not really working for me, but I still don't know what else to do. So the cycle continued for another year or two, but it got much worse. I got into meth use, crack cocaine. I did whatever was available. For the last 2 or 3 years of my use, I was actually homeless in Salt Lake, and I started dealing drugs just to afford to use the drugs that I didn't like. I didn't like the drugs, but I didn't know what to do without them. Eventually, in 2014, 2015, I went to another treatment center. It was about my sixth or seventh one, and they actually gave me a scholarship to stay much longer than the 90 days you usually get of adult treatment centers because they said, wow, Keldy, you've been here 3 times before and you are a bad case, so you can just stay for 6 months, which was incredible at the time. I had no money. My parents were tapped out. Their insurance was tapped out. So I stayed there for 6 months, and the week before I was supposed to graduate, I left the treatment center and relapsed. And 6 months was the most clean time I had ever had in my adult life up until then. And I didn't get to go back and graduate. They kicked me out. And I had overdosed, and so an ambulance was called, and I went to a psych ward. And all of these things have happened before. I've been to psych wards, I've overdosed. But at this psych ward, they told me no one wants to take you. Your parents say that there's no more insurance money. So, good luck. I had weaseled my way into a sober living program for about a week before they realized I had no money, and then I got kicked out of there. Um, so, what happened is I was just full time homeless. I had no job. The rehab money had run out. I was just homeless, just doing drugs, and I was like, I'll die any day now, and then this won't be a problem anymore. Um, Eventually, my probation officer called me, knowing that I had been avoiding him for several months, and he said, if you don't come into the office tomorrow, I will send a cop to come and find you, and you will go to prison for a year. And I said, okay, well, I'll come into the office.
Yeah.
So I had my little homeless Keldy backpack shoved full of all my homeless Keldy accoutrements, like all my drugs and the syringes and whatever else I had at the time. And I walked over to the probation office in Provo, and everything I owned was in this backpack, and I didn't want to lose it because everything that I liked was in this backpack. So I hid it in the bushes outside of the probation office, and I said, surely no one will find this here. So I walked into the probation office, and I was sitting down in the waiting area with the other criminals for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and a bunch of police walk in holding my backpack, and they go, okay, you guys, who does this belong to? And none of us say anything, especially not me. And eventually they start looking through the backpack, and they're pulling out drugs and paraphernalia, an odd book or pamphlet, and they pull out a prescription pill bottle with my name on it. And they go, okay, Keldy, you come with us. And so I went back with the police officers knowing I was fully cooked. And they told me that there was enough paraphernalia in that backpack to get 32 felony drug charges from. It was not good. And so I decided my life is over. I'll probably go to prison for the rest of my life. When I had to go to the courts for that violation, they actually threw me the biggest bone, and I was granted a lot of mercy. And instead of giving me any new charges, they told me, you're always good as an inmate. You never cause problems. You help be a peacekeeper amongst the other inmates, so we're going to give you one last chance, but you cannot leave early on good behavior. You need to be here for 6 months, and you need to complete the rehab inside of the jail. And if either one of you guys ever have the chance to go to a rehab outside of jail or inside of the jail, try to get it done outside of the jail. The ones inside the jail are not as nice. So,
There you go.
yeah. So I completed the rehab inside of the jail. I stayed the full 6 months, and I, spent a lot of time thinking while I was in that jail. There's not a lot to do. I had read all the books. I had made all the phone calls. I had nothing but time to sit and think. And for the first time in many years, I had 6 months sober again just because I was in this jail. And so my brain was starting to kind of work. And I realized that I had kind of half tried most of the things that were recommended to me. I have tried doing 12 steps. I have tried DBT, CBT, all of the things I had learned in treatment. Some of the things I really actually genuinely tried. I tried again to be spiritual. I tried to be honest with myself. And none of those things had really worked for me because I couldn't be completely honest with myself. There was still this big part of me that I knew was a problem. I had identified years before my girlfriend had died. And I knew that part was me being transgender. And it seemed frightening because I didn't know anyone who was transgender in 2014, 2015. I knew that people generally try to avoid talking about it because it's like a weird new thing and people had strong feelings on it. And I thought that maybe that could be the key to my problems, why I felt the way I did. But it was scary. I knew it required money and stability, and I didn't have either one of those things. But I made a decision in the jail that since that's really the only thing I haven't tried, once I get out of jail this time, I'll call a gender therapist and I'll just ask, like, what would this process look like for me? I was 24 years old at the time. I had been in treatments of different types for about 7 years. What the worst thing that could happen, I guess, is my parents would disown me, but I haven't talked to my parents in 2 years anyway, so I guess I really have nothing left to lose. So once I was released from jail that time, I went into a sober living, and I promptly got a job, and I was working at a Subway, and it was great. And I immediately decided I don't actually want to do any of those things that I said I would do in jail.
Mm.
So I did not call a therapist. I didn't ask for help. I made it about 30 days. So at this point, I was 7 months sober. And 30 days after I'd been released from jail, I was at work at the Subway, and it was about 8 o'clock at night, and the thought occurred to me, I could really use some heroin right now. I'm not feeling great, um, and I don't want to hurt myself. So this is what I know how to do. And then for whatever reason, instead of getting my phone and dialing my dealer, I ended up searching gender therapists in Utah County. And I found a number, and I expected, well, I'll give them a call because if at least I give them a call, then I have to put myself on the hook to do something. I gave him a call expecting a voicemail, but the doctor picked up and said, hey, like, what's going on? I had never talked to her before, and I kind of told her my story. Like, I'm a struggling addict. I desperately need to do something else, or else I will die. I don't know anyone over the age of 25 who's a heroin addict. They all pass away before then. And I think this might apply to me, but I don't really know what this is, this gender transition, this hormone replacement therapy. Can you help me? And she actually put me on the schedule the next day to go and talk to her. Um, and this is a big deal for me because that is what had been the source of my pain all of those years. So I went to the therapist the next day, and I kind of gave her more information. Like, this is the year I realized that this was an option I had and realized I probably can't do it. I still don't really know how to do it. But it turns out it was pretty easy. I gave her my entire stack of paperwork from 7 treatment centers, and all the therapists at that doctor's office had said, yeah, you have a pretty well documented history of struggling with gender dysphoria. I had never heard the phrase before, and they said, yeah, you meet all the criteria to start this hormone replacement therapy. And for me, it was an absolute game changer. I started hormone replacement therapy a month later after following all the advice of my doctors and my therapists. You know,
Good
typically
people again.
very good people. Yeah. You know, for at the time, you had to be in gender therapy for a year. I had 7 years of therapy with
Yeah.
documented gender dysphoria issues. And they said, yeah, so we can get this started for you right away. This seems to be a pretty serious case for you. And the first time I took a shot of testosterone, which was the hormone replacement therapy prescribed to me, it was like this big weight had been lifted, even though nothing had changed yet. Um, I thought of all the years I spent hiding myself from the world, trying to cover my body, trying to not speak in public because I just felt so awkward about who I was and so disaligned with my mind and my body. And I took that first shot and I realized this might be what can save me. And for me, that absolutely was the case. Once I started pursuing my gender therapy, the desire I had to feel that pain with substances eroded completely. There were many times, you know, that I would still have that kind of itch in my mind saying, well, you know, you might not be in the same kind of pain you were in 2 years ago, but you and your mom just had an argument. Heroin would probably make it better. But I was able to fall back on a lot of the treatment I received specifically about substance use things to get through that. I was able
Skills.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
I was able to rely on all those skills like distress tolerance, emotional regulation, asking for help. And once I had addressed the main cause that I was in pain, just sobriety itself and having my brain be given time to repair the neural pathways that had been damaged through all those years of substance use was enough for me. So my life became really, really good really quickly. And it was like a snowball effect. After that first um, appointment with my doctor, I started the testosterone, and then I got a job, and then that job became a promotion, and then I met someone in 12 steps who I got a house with, and I got a dog 2 years later, and it happened so seamlessly after I made that first decision to try something that seemed really hard and impossible for me to reach. But I decided I had to try it. And from there, I'm currently 10 years sober. I have not been back to jail since that last time. I haven't been back to treatment since that last time either. But I got a job working at a local health food store, and I was quickly promoted to the general manager there, and I got a degree in business management, which I never thought I would be able to do because I was a junkie and homeless.
Right.
But I've made really good friends, and I have a good life. I left that job at the grocery store to come work for Telos because I wanted to help other people like myself. But yeah, I really love my life now, and it's at a place where I never would have expected it to be 15 years ago. But that's the story. I know there's a lot of details and a lot of things that probably won't apply to everyone, but that's my story.
Okay, so Tony, what you may not know is that while he's, everyone at the grocery store is just raving and everybody's bragging about Keldy, and and going back to the beginning of Keldy's story in this, this church community where he was raised. So I end up working with his parents, right, in a church calling, and all they can do is brag about their son, right? And oh, Keldy this and Keldy that, and like they're so proud of him, right? Like I guess the full circle is that his biggest fear of rejection from his parents, right? It was completely flipped, and I'm actually like trying to recruit him away, right? I'm like, hey, give me his number, everything, and so when you came over here, Keldy, like you've been such a huge blessing to our community, and in so many different ways. But it's an inspiring story, right? And our students here, just they just seem so grounded, right? Because and most of them don't know your whole story, but they know you,
Right.
right? That you felt so empty about in the past. It's just who you are that is amazingly stabilizing for so many of our young students. It's pretty cool story and very very inspiring. We're grateful that you don't run the grocery store anymore, and that you're here with us, right?
You.
Making a difference in the world. So why is it important? Like you went through the 7 rehabs, right? Now you're working as a professional, pretty much, the leader of that group. Why is it important that the students at Carter House have specialty substance use treatment in comparison to the other programs that are focused on depression? And because intuitively, after hearing your story, maybe we got it wrong, because we tried for years. We tried for years to treat the depression, to treat the anxiety, to treat the holes in the soul, thinking that if we did, that the substance use would just resolve itself,
Right.
or that we could just do a little fancy dressing with it. Like we did teach the skills, but we didn't hyper focus on the skills because really the real problem was in the core. So why are you so passionate, and why do you believe that specialty substance use treatment is essential in a specialty program?
Right.
And maybe you don't.
Actually, I do.
Yeah,
So
right.
I know it seems super counterintuitive with my story, as you said,
Right.
because I actually feel very lucky. I had one very specific problem, and I knew what the problem was, and I knew I probably should address this if I'm going to stand a chance. Most people don't have that kind of absolute clarity, and I only gained that sort of absolute clarity after 7 years of trial and error. I had tried everything else. This was the only thing I hadn't addressed.
Right.
So I'm actually pretty blessed in that way to have that very specific problem.
But you're an outlier in that way.
Right. I don't think that's very typical. But the reason I think specialty treatment is so necessary, especially for young people, is we look at one of our typical students on Carter House. He's 15. He's just starting to enter like his adolescent years. He's looking at being an adult in a couple of years. He does not really know who he is, what he's about. All he knows is, I don't feel good. I feel better when I use substances. I don't know if that's a problem because he doesn't have the years of experience to say, "Oh, this gets worse."
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
They have me tell them it gets worse, and they can believe me or not. But even at their time in Telos or wherever program they're in, they can see through trial and error inside the program. Well, every time I go substance seeking and I try to AWOL or run off of the campus to go get a beer or cigarettes on the corner, it gets worse for me inside of this program. So what we focus on in Carter House and in specialty treatment in general, what I focused on all the times I was in treatment were those skills that we talked about. So, like looking at emotional regulation, we're looking at the very vague idea of one of these young people feels bad. Substance use is the solution to that. And one of the things that I kind of do with the boys is I'll poke at, well, why do you feel bad? Trying to get some of those more specific answers. And it almost always comes down to I'm anxious. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no direction. I feel othered. I feel isolated,
Hopeless.
hopeless. So the solution for those feelings, just like the solution I had found, was substances for them because it's easy. That's usually offered to them for free from their schools, from their peers. So we need to look at very specific skills on what to do about that substance use and then how we can replace that substance use as the solution with something that won't get you in more trouble. So I like to cast a very wide net with specialty substance use treatment. Not everyone's going to have that one thing.
Right.
But everyone's going to know by the time they go through substance use treatment, I'm using this as a solution. Here are the other solutions I can use until I find that one thing that works for me or until these solutions are acceptable for me. So what substance use treatment will usually teach you is those specialty skills, and it will also introduce recovery communities to the people who are seeking treatment. So that does two things. One, now instead of automatically knowing my only way to fix how I'm feeling is to turn to substances, I also know whether I want to apply these skills or not. I can do these 5 things that I've identified in my substance use treatment. I can call a trusted friend and ask for support. I can very honestly express how I'm feeling, process it, have someone listen to me without offering, solutions. Just express how I'm feeling. That gets rid of some of the weight of what this feeling carries. I can use these DBT skills, these CBT skills. I can go engage in a hobby or something that I feel passionate about while I ride the distress of this craving and wait for it to die down. So they'll know that there are these options instead of the only solution they know of is substance use. It also introduces that community that I was talking about.
Yeah.
There's something really powerful in knowing I'm not the only one who's found this solution, and I'm not the only one who's found that this solution doesn't work for me in the long run.
Right.
It makes things worse, and it becomes a problem in and of itself. So a lot of specialty substance use programs will introduce their clients to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, different 12 steps organizations. There are other organizations that aren't those. There's Smart Recovery, Addicts to Athlete, and it's basically showing everyone all of these people have struggled with what you're struggling with. Look at them. You could have lives like theirs. There is hope for you.
Yeah.
You just need to be willing to do this amount of work and call someone.
Right.
So that's why I feel very passionately about it. I would say probably 1 or 2 students a year I have at Carter House know specifically, this is my problem. This one problem is my problem, and this is why I use drugs.
Right.
Most of them don't have that insight.
Most of them haven't got there yet.
And so we're working on, well, let's at least see what you can do other than turn to drugs while you still explore that stuff.
Don't you think also, well, I don't know. I don't know what you think, but that's why you're here to answer the questions. In my mind, what I think is that the culture, right, that I was raised in, drugs were bad, drugs were illegal, drugs were dangerous, drugs hurt you. Now, even inside of small religious communities, with the internet, right, the legal system is saying not a big deal, right? Some of the fringe or not fringe medical world is saying, not a big deal, right? The social media in particular, and much of which is true and much of which is just total BS, right, is saying this is for sure not a big deal.
Right.
And so it becomes so normalized, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm going to do this bad thing that I know is bad. But for many of our students, they don't believe that it's bad.
Right.
And so they're getting the solution to their emptiness, and they don't even feel bad about it.
Right.
Right. And so what I've noticed, just from the outside, looking into the program that you're running for us, is that there's a lot of education.
Yeah.
Is that true? And
A lot of education. I absolutely agree with what you're saying about social media and, different voices putting the idea out here that, yeah, this is a perfectly fine,
Yeah.
way to treat how you're feeling. And for a lot of people, it is a fine way. Not for my people. Not for my people that hold on to that solution so tightly that it becomes the problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I do in Carter House is a lot of education, and we look at a lot of what the boys are feeling, how they're using with a sense of curiosity instead of judgment. So, for example, I have one student who does have some very serious problems back at home, but they're problems of violence, gang related things. He's not in a gang, he's been used by gang members in his area. And so his solution for when he sees that violence and it hurts him is, well, I'm going to turn to substances. So I'll ask him a lot of questions. What does this do for you? Does it
Hmm.
make you feel safe? Is that the problem, that you feel unsafe? What else can you do that's not going to get you further down this path of stuck in with this crowd? Because if you're using substances with them and engaging in that kind of dealing with these, people, this is only getting worse for you. Like, what do you think? I like to ask the boys, what do you gain from this? And also, what are you losing from this? That's the side of the equation a lot of people
Right.
don't like to
They
see,
haven't.
especially when they're young.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that we'll have a student that wants to wait until they're a legal age to get a green card to use marijuana or whatever. But they've been through the education classes with me. They know how marijuana affects their brain chemistry,
Right.
how every time they use a thing, they're going to experience that phenomenon of craving. And they don't have the control they wish they had over it.
Right.
So they can go and get a green card legally, but they'll also have a head full of the knowledge that when I smoke this, I lose the ability to control what I do next.
Right.
So it's a lot of inquisition, a lot of curiosity, and a lot of open discussion to see, does this line up with where you want to be? You say you want to have an, your own business, you say you want to have a family. Where does this green card fit into that when you know intellectually, even if you don't feel it, that you lose control the moment you engage in that?
Right.
So there's a lot of education, a lot of introspection.
Good.
So as I've listened to everything you've said, Keldy, to me, it's all valuable, but maybe the most valuable is just hearing your story. And I want to thank you for your transparency and your generosity in sharing that. It's probably not something you lead out with when you meet someone new on the street.
Not usually.
Um, but here you are, and this is a podcast, and who knows how many people will listen to it, or it'll be referred on to others. And I can't help but think that there may be others that are, you know, further back on the same path that you were on, that are looking for trying to find what is the root. We've been plucking at the leaves of this for years. What's the root? We need to get down to the roots of this issue, and so just telling your story may be saving lives for sure. But as a parent, as you're sitting here watching your child go down this path, or you're suspecting they're going down this path, two parts to this question. Number one, what should parents be looking for that are signs that your child may have a problem? And is there a line that they cross where it's like, okay, now we need to look for inpatient treatment, like a residential program, versus just going to the once a week therapy or the several times a week outpatient therapy?
Right. That's a really good question. And this is my opinion based off of my experience. I think it's a good opinion. Typically, what I would look for, signs of substance use or maybe problematic behavior starting to come up, are just things that are outside of the norm of your relationship. So, let's say I'm my parents' son. My parents noticed with me that I stopped calling. I'd very frequently been very attentive to our relationship. I stopped coming to the house. Things start going missing around the house. This was all before they knew I was engaged in this behavior. I'd start missing work, start missing school, and they don't really know where I'm at or what I'm doing. And this is different than what they're used to, where I'm very connected with them. I have really open lines of communication. Does that mean that I need to have the cops called on me and be sent to treatment? No, but that is outside the norm. So that's when my parents start kind of looking into it further. Things that are probably more alarming signs of substance use would be differences in eating, sleeping, sleeping in way too late, getting up way too early, not sleeping at all, extreme weight gain, extreme weight loss, physical differences when the substances have started affecting your body and your general physical health, big bags under the eyes, your teeth are having problems, things like that. Um, and I would say where that kind of line is between knowing that, yeah, my kid is using substances and yeah, my kid needs to go to an inpatient is when does this person using the substances start becoming a safety hazard to themselves or others? And when does their substance use start being something that's causing destruction in their lives and the lives of others? So I was sent to rehab, mostly off of a court order, but I could have been sent I was sent many times for overdosing. If I was overdosing, clearly I'm not safe to be outside of inpatient. I
Right.
need to be somewhere where there's enough oversight and control of what I'm doing that I can be guaranteed safety. Um, I was sent to inpatient in times where I was homeless and I had no money to find a place to live. I was sent to inpatient when I was stealing and pawning other people's possessions, when I was affecting other people's lives, causing drama and harm and pain in the lives of my brothers or my sister or my parents. And I didn't really necessarily feel bad about any of those times I was sent to treatment because I could see, like, yeah, this is a problem. Like, I do want to keep using drugs, but I can see how this has affected people. I can see how this has affected me. I was pronounced dead 3 times. This is clearly an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I would say that line is. Um, I recently had a parent ask me, he was asking me about his son and what we should do with his son. And I recommended, well, he's in a psych hold right now for overdosing. You should definitely try to send him to inpatient. He was 18 at the time, so he had to go to adult inpatient. And while I was talking to this parent, he actually asked me, he said, also, like, I was looking through my son's phone and I see that there's a friend he has from high school 2 years ago, and his friend had did cocaine. Should I tell his parents or call the police? And I said, well, you can tell his parents, but let me ask you some other questions about this friend. Has he dropped out of school? Does he have a job? Like, what signs are there that this is a serious problem for him? And he said, actually, he's very successful. He's, a manager at his job, and he's starting college in a month. And, I've never heard any sort of behavioral outburst from him. And as gross as it may taste, for me to say, I don't know if that kid necessarily needs
Right.
treatment at this point. Like,
Yeah.
that
Right.
could be just a youthful trying out of a thing, and keep an eye on that. If his life starts going down a path where there is destruction and there is losing things that he values, then yeah, I would definitely recommend inpatient. But that's usually where that line is for me. Like,
Okay.
am I able to have a normal life?
Right.
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 Well, Keldy, I just want to thank you again for coming in and sharing your wisdom, your expertise, your personal story. Um, I just think there's so much there. We could probably maybe we need to have a Keldy
Part two.
episode 2, episode
Episode 3.
and
Yeah, I
make it a
know.
regular thing because I feel like there's a lot more we could talk about. But um, we'll just wrap it up for today. Is there anything that you want to share? Maybe I'll ask you this: if you could say one thing to a parent or
To a young
to a
person.
young person who's struggling, what would you say to them?
I'll answer your question in 2 parts. To a parent, I would say, please keep an open mind. No kid wants to. Sometimes it might feel like it, but no kid wants to piss off their parent. No kid wants to drive a wedge between these relationships. It's usually when a kid's acting out like this, it's almost always from a place of fear, anxiety, and this is the solution they found. And it does not make sense to adults who know that this is not a good solution,
Right.
but it makes a lot of sense to young people. To young people, I would say pretty much the same thing. Have an open mind that there could be alternate solutions to what you're feeling. Trust that the people around you do love and care about you, and that you can ask for help without necessarily knowing what the outcome of asking for help would be. If I had asked for help when I first started feeling the way I had felt as a young person, I could have skipped a lot of painful parts of my life. I felt certain I knew how my parents would respond. And turns out my parents are my biggest cheerleaders, just like you were saying.
Yeah.
But I was so certain they would reject me that I never asked for help. I never told anyone how I was feeling. I just tried to solve it. So for young people, trust that there is hope and that the people around you do love you and they will try their best to understand you. And sometimes that will take a while to get that mutual understanding. But it's worth the effort because you can save yourself a lot of pain. You can save the people you love a lot of pain just by asking for help. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
Of course.
Fantastic.
I'm also inspired when something destructive and painful becomes something beautiful and helpful and building. And so thank you so much for being at Telos and being here with us today and pouring your heart into the lives of these young people that you're helping save. With that, we will go ahead and wrap it up. And until next time, listeners, remember, mental health matters. Thanks for listening. Your mental health journey is so important to us. We'd love your help spreading the word so we can reach as many people as possible. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe here on our social media or wherever you access your podcasts. Thanks.